This is Business Weekend with Ross Greenwood.
Hi there and welcome to Business Weekend. I'm Ross Greenwood. Coming up on the program today, the data hacking of Optus now leaves every business and government department exposed. How do you know your customer is who they say they are? We break down how the hack got out of hand this week. The Director General of the Oecd, Matthias Cormann, well, he was in town this week. We caught up with him to talk about the risks to the global economy, the impact of the war in Ukraine, and whether higher interest rates are the only way to answer soaring inflation.
Keep your markets open. Keep ensuring that products can flow across borders. This is not the time to impose restrictions on markets.
Plus, this week, Treasurer Jim Chalmers promised that his forthcoming budget will collect more tax from multinational companies. The man responsible for collecting that money, the Tax Commissioner, Chris Jordan, is on the program today.
We will not give up here. We will not be stooged. We will not be deferred. We will not be browbeaten.
We also check the state of the markets with Funds Management Hall of Famer Anton Tagliaferro. And small business operators dream of making it big in Las Vegas of all places. And we're there watching it all happen.
We're used to being thrown around in choppy seas. Our boats are a little smaller than the big boats. And so we really, constantly are seeing things that other businesses might not notice.
But let's start the program this week with the massive data hack at Optus and the way it spiralled out of control for the company as it dawned on everybody that the 9.8 million compromised identities will affect every business and every government department. Edward Boyd wraps up a week that Optus would prefer to forget but won't be allowed to for a very long time.
It's odd. When the Optus data breach happened Thursday last week, it wasn't the biggest news event. Optus and its chief executive, Kelly Bayer-Rosmarin, seemed to have it covered.
We are very confident that this was a sophisticated attack.
At the time, Optus said the hacker stole 9.8 million customer records, including names, phone numbers, email addresses, and some driver licence and passport numbers. But cybersecurity experts and the government had their doubts, claiming the attack was not complex. Rather, it was Optus at fault for allowing the hacker to opportunistically steal the information.
What is of concern for us is how what is quite a basic hack was undertaken on Optus. We should not have a telecommunications provider in this country which has effectively left the window open for data of this nature to be stolen.
Once they have this information, fraudsters will be able to establish new bank accounts, new investment accounts, new credit accounts, effectively using somebody else's identity to engage in nefarious activities.
Everything I've seen to date now indicates this was not a sophisticated crime. It was a crime, definitely. No one deserves to be victimised, including Optus, but it would appear to be a pretty minor technical problem that has led to a very serious loss of data that can never be returned to those individuals.
The problems and the publicity mounted for Optus. The hacker said they would release 10,000 names a day unless Optus paid a $1 million ransom. For the volume of data stolen, it's surprising the hacker demanded such a small amount of money. They could have asked for much more. On Tuesday this week, the hacker released the personal information of 10,000 customers, again with the demand for $1 million. The Sky News business team revealed that within an hour of this release, the hacker had taken down the database of 10,000 names and bizarrely issued an apology to the people affected and to Optus. But Optus made an emphatic statement to us about whether it had paid the ransom. No, it said, it did not pay. But why the hacker so quickly disappeared has never and may never be answered. Optus's problems were far from over. That release of data showed valid Medicare ID numbers, something Optus had failed to disclose to the authorities and the minister.
So we do know that an awful lot of information, and Optus, to your point in the introduction, probably didn't necessarily tell the full story over the last several days when they were just talking about driver's licences and passports. As you said, there's Medicare numbers. There are obviously really interesting email addresses.
The government was furious. Claire O'Neill put enormous pressure on the company. The Prime Minister and the Attorney General chimed in as well.
We were concerned this morning about reports that personal information from the Optus data breach apparently also includes Medicare numbers. Medicare numbers were never notified as forming part of the breach. And I can say that Optus has a clear obligation to notify affected customers.
Optus eventually came clean, saying 14,900 valid Medicare ID numbers were stolen in the initial attack. The government believes 40% of Australia's population has been affected, and the government is now demanding that Optus pay for new passports and Medicare numbers for the Aussies affected. Some state governments waived fees for the issuing of new driver licences.
Vic Roads and the Department of Transport have made it clear that we will issue licences to anybody who's been affected by the Optus hack. We're also going to seek some compensation from Optus because this is on them.
Have they said they'd pay? We haven't heard from them.
We've said that they should pay. The Prime Minister's made that clear. The Foreign Minister has also written to Optus asking for Optus to accept the cost of replacing passports if that is what is required. We haven't yet had a response from Optus.
To make matters worse for the Optus CEO, parent company Singtel's board were in Australia this week for a board meeting to watch the whole thing unfold. A front row seat to the crisis. And by late this week, Singtel broke its silence. It was committed to its customers' security, but equally, the statement said it remains committed to its chief executive, Kelly Bayer-Rosmarin, and her team.
Well, this week, the OECD downgraded its forecast for the global economy, including here in Australia. Here it says the economy will grow at 2% next year, not 2.5% as it's previously said. By coincidence, this week, the OECD Director General, Matthias Cormann, was in Australia. I caught up with him and asked if the global economy is headed for recession. Matthias Cormann, many thanks for your time.
Good to be here.
This week, the OECD downgraded the outlook for global economic growth. Are you confident that the world can avoid a global recession?
Well, look, we're not forecasting a recession. We have downgraded for the second time now our global growth outlook, and fundamentally driven by the ongoing war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. As the war started, the world was still recovering from the impact of the pandemic, but that recovery was actually quite strong and quite rapid. But since February this year, of course, what we've seen is a significant slowing of global growth, higher inflation, and of course implications for energy and food markets around the world. And so, yes, our outlook is more pessimistic. I have to say the risks are very much tilted to the downside, but at this point, we don't see a recession.
Okay, so individual countries quite clearly are going to be impacted by this, more or less. There are going to be some countries inevitably that will fall into recession. We saw the UK responding this week, for example. So,
globally in aggregate, we are projecting a 2.2% growth next year. But indeed, yes, individual countries will see their economies contract, and it does depend on the level of exposure, for example, when it comes to increased energy prices. And if I look inside Europe, obviously there are some countries that will be more impacted than others, depending on their exposure traditionally to Russian gas, oil and gas.
Okay, so then comes to an issue that you've got a Northern Hemisphere winter coming, and then there are already energy shortages. There's question marks about food. So is there now a real danger that some countries could face food shortages, or that there could be hardship caused by those energy shortages?
Well, there shouldn't be food shortages. The availability of food will be there. The risk is that countries around the world react to what they perceive the risks to be, and that they impose export restrictions and the like, which would make a difficult situation even worse. If I look at global production of wheat, for example, global production of wheat in this most recent season has been higher than the year before, and we don't expect a material decline in production next year. But of course, if we see markets react to their future expectations as opposed to what is actually most likely to happen, then those reactions in themselves can drive prices up and can also prevent food supplies getting into those markets where they're required. So there is a real pressure on food prices. There's a real risk that some parts of the world will not have access to the food they need, but it's more a logistics issue. And so what we're saying saying at the OECD is to countries around the world, keep your markets open, keep ensuring that products can flow across borders. This is not the time to impose restrictions on markets.
But of course, a lot of this will depend on how long the conflict continues inside Ukraine. Are there any signs that that is not going to be a prolonged conflict?
Well, look, I mean, that is beyond my area of expertise. I mean, you know, obviously this conflict has now been going for 7 months. The world clearly would be better off. I mean, the people of Ukraine, the people of Russia and the people around the world would be better off if this conflict was stopped immediately on the right terms. And I mean, indeed, the world would be better off if it had never started. So, I mean, that being said, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's sort of hard to predict how much longer this will go and how much worse it could get. So there is downside risk and there is uncertainty, and I mean, that is certainly true.
But the problem is here that you've got central banks now raising interest rates to head off that inflation. You've got the Bank of England, you've got the Reserve Bank, you've got the Federal Reserve, all doing that. And of course, they've talked about the narrow path of raising interest rates that could tip their economies into recession.
Well, everybody is focused on achieving a soft landing, but it is true. I mean, there is risk. I mean, if I look at the inflation story, I mean, inflation had already started, before the war of aggression against Ukraine. I mean, as the recovery from COVID got underway, the recovery in demand was so strong and so rapid that supply wasn't able to keep up. So there was that initial supply shock, and that there's initial supply bottlenecks that were starting to drive prices up. You had a lot of fiscal stimulus still, of course, going around communities around the world. And then on top of that, you now had this additional supply shock caused by the war in Ukraine, in particular impacting on energy markets, but also markets like fertilizer, for things like fertilizer, which again is having an impact on food prices. So there's a range of different dynamics driving increased inflation, and certainly what we're seeing is that inflation around the world is getting more broad-based and is at risk of being more entrenched. So we certainly support the measures taken by central banks around the world to really take whatever measures are necessary from a monetary policy point of view to get on top of inflation. And our expectation is that as these monetary policy measures take effect, as supply bottlenecks start to ease, that inflation will start to ease throughout 2023 into early 2024, though the energy story and I guess the wage inflation story are something that we will need to watch for some time.
Okay, so then take me to the UK, cutting taxes. In other words, stimulating their economy at a time when otherwise they're trying to reduce demand. I find that rather interesting, and then to see the Bank of England coming out and buying back bonds to stave off any economic downturn, it's almost as though that is counter to the measures that other nations around the world are taking. Is that the right approach, do you think?
Look, I mean, as we released our interim economic outlook on Monday, our clear advice is that fiscal and monetary policy should be working hand in hand at this time. It's obviously important for us to bring inflation down. It's important for people around the world. It's important for households. It's important for business to bring inflation down. And certainly our advice from the OECD's point of view is that fiscal and monetary policy should be aligned and should be very much working hand in hand.
Okay, so then the reason why you're here in Australia is as a result of the forum of the leading tax proponents in every OECD country. Now, they're trying to unify tax policy to ensure that multinational companies pay their fair share of tax, something that you worked very hard on when you were the finance minister in Australia. So this is also important for economies right now, especially when they need the dollars to make certain that their budgets are as strong as they can be while they're under economic duress.
Well, look, it's very, very important. Governments around the world need to be able to raise the necessary revenue to fund the public services their people expect in a way that is least distorting in the economy, like least distracting from growth, most efficient, but also in a way that is fair and equitable. And I guess what we've been seeing in recent times in the context of digitalization and globalization, that a growing number of multinational businesses was not paying their fair share of tax in those jurisdictions in which they generated some of their profits. And so what we've been working on internationally through the OECD, through the base erosion profit shifting project in particular, is to really tackle multinational tax avoidance, making sure that businesses around the world pay their fair share of tax where they operate. And you know, we've made a lot of progress, but there is still some work to finalise. And indeed, I mean, the two-pillar international tax reform proposal, which was agreed by 137 countries and jurisdictions around the world last year, is what we're focused on implementing now, and that's, you know, one of the topics that we've been talking about here.
Yeah, Matthias Cormann, good to chat to you. Many thanks for your time.
Always good to talk to you.
Coming up after the break, the Tax Commissioner Chris Jordan and his quest to get a fair share of tax from multinational companies. Plus, one of Australia's best regarded investment managers, Anton Tagliaferro, founder of Investors Mutual, has announced his retirement. We speak with him about the markets and the future. Thanks for being with us here on Business Weekend. This week, the senior tax authorities from 40 countries gathered in Australia for the very first time. The Forum on Tax Administration addressed the pressing issue of how to stop multinational companies from siphoning off their profits to avoid paying tax. The host this week was the Australian Tax Commissioner, Chris Jordan, and I caught up with him on the sidelines.
Yeah, for some years now, under the auspices of the OECD, there was what was called the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting, the BEPS project, that turned into this much larger two pillars solution to this. I think there's a genuine recognition now that if you pay billions of dollars of royalties a year to some shell company, brass plate company, nominee directors in the Cayman Islands, well, how can economically that be right? How can it be so easy to simply transfer the ownership of intellectual property that's worth billions of dollars a year in royalties that just sits there with no tax? So the whole landscape needed to be changed because the ability of these new high-tech, where are they? Where are they based? Where do they supply from? It couldn't be allowed to say there's no tax in Australia, there's no tax in these other countries. There has to be some element of taxation of the value created. So some of these new proposals are looking at, well, where's the customer? If you supply something that's used to Australian residents, and they pay an amount into an Australian bank to you, a lot of that activity is actually happening in Australia. So some value is created and therefore some tax should rightly be paid. And this is all about how to work out new rules. The last international tax architecture was designed by the League of Nations in 1932. It was all about physical presence, and of course that's not all that relevant these days.
So the tax office has been working on this for quite some time now, and it has had success. And you can see now that big tech companies are paying significantly more tax in this country than they were previously. So is the job done for Australia?
I don't think I would go that far. We have had some success in terms of the marketing hubs of Australian companies selling their product overseas. Rio, we had a $1 billion settlement and we've solved all those disputes. BHP was something over 500 million a couple of years ago. ResMed, we did around 500 million settlement. Google, and these are all publicly announced, I think Google was about 480 million. But importantly also Microsoft, Apple and some others did not announce the settlement figures, but they were of some significance as well. So we've worked closely and hard, and we've never resolved. Our resolve is going to continue. I have been very public in my statements about we will not give up here. We will not be stooged. We will not be deferred. We will not be browbeaten by so-called world experts. The prior Labor government, The Senate inquiry that was chaired by Sam Dastyari was very focused on this and created a lot of community and business concern. Our new Labor government has announced in their election that they will be doing more to focus in this area. So it's not done yet. We've done well on what's called debt dumping. There was that Chevron case, and in that resources area, I can tell you, we haven't used this figure much, but we've knocked out about $40 billion worth of interest deductions across that resource sector. 40 billion. And Chevron themselves came out and said, we will pay 3.7 billion in tax this year. That's not all just high prices.
And that's money coming straight into the Australian
That's straight to us because we eliminated 40 billion of carry forward deductions across that sector.
Okay, so this week Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, says, as you point out, that the emphasis in the budget coming up will be to raise more money from multinationals. So does this mean you need more powers to be able to achieve that, or is it working under the existing framework?
Well, we will need to wait and see what happens in the budget. Obviously, I can't preempt anything there. Clearly, there's been some public statements made by Jim Chalmers.
I guess my
Stephen
question
Jones.
is whether you have the powers to actually bring more tax in, or whether what you're doing already can effectively deliver that to the Treasurer.
We have the powers. Sometimes it's the legislation. So we have the powers to go in, look, argue, work out what's arm's length. But sometimes you might need a bit of a limitation on the level of deductions in interest. I won't go too complex here. The thin cap deals with the quantum of debt, and then there's the pricing of the debt. The Chevron case was effectively about the pricing.
But this is about shifting profits overseas by using that debt. That's
Correct.
pretty much it. Reducing your profits, meaning your taxable profit here in Australia is less because you've been able to shift the rest of it overseas.
Well, if you look at a major resource group worldwide that has no net debt in their group, well, if they borrow at 2%, $30 billion, and lend it here at 9%, that's 7% margin, and it's done in a way that there is no interest withholding tax, no 10% on the gross, and it's done in a way that there's no tax back in the US. So when you look at what's happened, a borrowing has been made at 2%, a loan has been made to 7%, and at the end of the day, all that's happened is 7% interest has been paid back to the US with no tax.
Yes.
That's classic transfer pricing.
Okay, so I want to go to another aspect of this, and that is the cooperation between all the various tax authorities, the OECD. In the past, when a country, a nation, even Australia, wanted to attract capital, they would provide tax incentives to do so. Does this prevent this cooperation, the ability for countries to attract capital by using their tax system?
I don't think so, because I do believe that there's a recognition now that there should be some reasonable amount of tax left wherever the economic activity that creates the value occurred. Like I said about customers dealing here, using the product here, no tax. Well, there's got to be some value. But having said that, there'll always be some countries, maybe in the short to medium term, not long term.
Well, Nigeria is one that said it won't cooperate. So it could arguably open itself up as a tax haven to attract these countries, to try and attract the profits, to actually have some residue of it hang on to its economy.
I think companies these days also look at a much broader thing than tax: rule of law, stability, currency fluctuations, how easy is it to get my money out as well as to put it in. So there's a whole lot of other factors rather than just a tax rate. So if people want to provide a more rapid depreciation of capital equipment, so if you undertake to build facilities and do actually spend a lot of money and do employ local people, some countries may say, well, we'll allow you a more rapid write-off, rather than saying no tax at all.
Which reduces your profit, which means you don't pay tax until really you've written off the value of those assets.
Until you've written it like our PRRT.
Yes, that's right.
That's a super profit tax that relies on virtually all investment being recovered before you start paying. There'll always be a little bit of that, but I think generally now people do not accept brass plate companies in tax havens getting billions of dollars for royalties, and they all want to work to see some form of tax. Otherwise, we're always got to be doing foreign aid more and more, because often the people that benefit out of the incentives are the multinational companies by not paying any tax. So there's got to be a bit of a hybrid here, I think, going forward.
Chris Jordan, always great to chat to you. Many thanks for your time today.
It's a pleasure.
For more than 35 years, Anton Tagliaferro has scanned company balance sheets, interviewed chief executives and studied company operations looking for investment opportunities. A funds management Hall of Famer, it's 25 years since he founded Investors Mutual. Well, he's shortly to retire, but not before we get him to work out the current state of the markets for us. Anton, as always, many thanks for your time. Right now we've got a situation. Interest rates are going up, bond markets are in some turmoil. But strangely enough, you see companies even this week. You saw Premier Investments, the retailer. You've seen Brickworks in the past couple of weeks have stellar results. They seem to almost fly in the face of what's happening on the stock market.
Well, of course, the stock market's forward-looking, and what Premier Investments and Brickworks are reporting is what's just been happening and what's currently happening now. And part of the issue is the economy is too strong, hence why those companies are having good results. And if you go out now, the restaurants are full, and you go, what's wrong? Everything's fine. Well, that's the problem. The problem is things have to slow, and central banks, London, the restaurants are full. Central banks are trying to slow the economy. They have to get demand down because inflation's too high.
OK, but hang on, but this almost flies in the face of it, because at the moment, while the restaurants are full, while people are building houses, they seem to be absorbing the interest rate rises for now because people have got jobs. Now, kind of you want that to be in a situation. You want people to have jobs. You want them to be spending. You want them to be prosperous. You want companies to be strong. Is there an argument here that maybe, that central banks are drinking all the Kool-Aid from the same bucket?
No, you don't want people to be spending too much. You don't want employment to be too strong, because it's all inflationary. And the problem is, at the moment, there's an inflation problem. Now, where it's come from exactly, you can talk about supply strains, commodity prices going up, etc. One of the key sources, of course, wages are going up. The employment is tight. And when employment is tight, it means people spend, because they're very secure on their job. They can ask for wage rises. Etc. So the central banks, they don't have many tools, and interest rates, they say interest rates are a very blunt tool. You can either put them up or you can put them down. Now, putting them down is easy. Everyone enjoys the fruits of when rates are coming down, particularly when they go to zero and mortgage rates are 2%. But of course, when they're going up, they're much more painful. And the truth is, and I think I said this when I was here months ago on the show, the problem is, inflation is up there, 7, 8, 9 or 10%, and interest rates are 2 or 3%. So they're well behind the 8 ball. That's the issue. So, of course, people are spending because rates are still very low. Real rates are still -4, -5 in the real economy.
Yeah.
So people are still spending. And the issue is, everyone's hoping for inflation to come down. Rates have to go up. The question is, how much can inflation fall now that wages are going up? And how much do interest rates have to go up to slow it all down?
So then take me to the investment markets, because in the last month or so, people who were trying to buy the dip, as they call it, when markets have come down, they go, right, this must be the time to go, because the central banks can't keep raising interest rates too much. Well, as it turns out, they were wrong. Buying the dip is probably a good idea strategically, because it's cheaper than it used to be. But this time around, it seems to be a fairly dangerous sort of a practice for people to try and follow.
Look, the truth is, Ross, nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows what the outlook for 2023 is. I mean, the IMF came out the other day, downgraded world growth, but they're still talking about an expansion. Well, the truth is the US looks like it could go into recession, et cetera, et cetera. The truth is, depends on how high rates have to go, And I think up to a month ago, people were thinking, oh, no, the central banks, they're bluffing, right? They won't go that tough because it's been nice, easy money for the last 10, 15 years, right? And the central banks have come in and kind of rescued financial markets every time there was a dip. Well, this time, as I said, they have this problem called inflation. And they can't come in and bail you out unless the Bank of England has to sort of support the bonds and currency because it's collapsing, right? So that's the issue. So the inflation is the issue, and central banks can't bail you out. In fact, they've got to take the lollies back. They've got to take the lollies gave you, all those low interest rates.
Yes.
They've got to take it back.
So apart from leaving your money in the bank, and trying to be very risk averse, is there anywhere that you can park your cash these days?
Look, Ross, the share market, obviously, if you take a long-term view, there's value beginning to appear. Obviously, you know, it's at times of gloom when value appears, right?
But do you reckon it's the right time to actually try and well, it's always the right time to find the value, but is it the right time to execute, given what's taken place with those buying?
Well, again, you average in. You don't have to rush in today, spend it all tomorrow or next week, right? You can average in. I mean, stocks are moving, obviously, at, you know, they're very volatile.
Well, going back in your history, that was part of the philosophy when you helped to set up that perpetual industrial share fund,
and
right?
we're looking now, right? So, Ross, there are three issues now. Forget the market going up and down. There are three things to focus on, right? Number one is, for companies, their interest costs are going up. So this is a negative for earnings. So if you look at, for example, the REITs, which distribute 100% of their income, but they've got 30 or 40% debt. Well, that debt going up means they may have to cut their distributions in the next year or two.
Yes.
Not a disaster.
So their valuations come down.
So it's not a disaster, but instead of getting a 6% yield, you might have to get 5.2, you know, because their rates are going up at a time because, you know, they have a bit of debt.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, obviously, the high debt at some point will impact consumers. Consumers will stop spending. You know, the central banks are going to keep hitting on the head until those restaurants, those cab queues are a bit shorter, right?
OK, so final one for you. You and I are old enough to remember back to the 1990s recession. Unlisted property trusts, unlisted mortgage funds basically ended up freezing themselves because their valuations came down so far. They didn't have the cash to pay out their investors. Is now a time to be cautious of some of those styles of investments?
Yes, it is a time to be cautious on everything, Ross, because nobody knows what 2020... What we do know is rates are going up. What we do know is consumer spending will slow. The central banks will slow it. And how that impacts various companies and various, you know, unlisted trusts depends on how much debt they have, how much is their income, etc. So, yes, there is going to be more volatility. Some companies won't make it. I mean, we've seen a lot of builders going broke in the last 3 months, right? So some companies won't make these tough times, right? So we are going, you know, at the moment, as you're saying, the company's results are good, everything's fine, and that's half the issue. The problem is central banks have to slow demand to get inflation down.
OK, so if you were stacking a portfolio right now, where would you like to see it overweight and underweight,
right, so
given the history?
OK, let's take a simple example. Coles and JB Hi-Fi.
Right.
OK? Now, Coles, you know, food, people will still buy food, even in a recession.
Yes.
The valuation, OK, 20 times, not that cheap, but on the yield of almost 4, you know, it's all right. It's getting there. Now, will people go and buy from Aldi because things get that tough, or will they buy their home? We don't know about the demand side. JB Hi-Fi, on the other hand, is a very discretionary type of good, right?
Yes.
If things get really bad, JB Hi-Fi sales will drop potentially. You know, they'll slow quite significantly. So, you know, some companies will be impacted more by this slowdown than other companies.
So do you think it's a time to go to those where it's effectively staples that people have to buy?
We are picking things which are more secure. The incomes, things like Horizon, where the coal contracts are long-term, Coles at the right price, you know, those sort of companies, yes. At this stage, because Ampol is another one, you know, petrol, the people who always buy petrol, maybe the volumes drop a bit because people stop driving if they lose their job or whatever. That's happened in 1990, by the way. But, you know, again, the volumes don't move that much. At least the volumes are quite stable, right? Yes. So, yes, we would rather buy those at this stage because with the others, you know, the JB Hi-Fis, the Domino's Pizzas, the Harvey Normans, you know, nobody really knows how bad the consumer downturn is going to be. And that will all depend on how much further the RBA has to keep hitting that interest rate button.
I'll tell you what, always good to have a chat to you. Anton Tagliaferro from Investors Mutual. We're going to do this again very shortly. Thanks for your time.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Ross.
Anton Tagliaferro there. Well, coming up after the break, we take you to Las Vegas, where small business operators from around the world have gathered to work out how to get bigger much faster. It's good to be with you here on Business Weekend. This week, thousands of small business owners gathered in Las Vegas, not to get rich quick on the slot machines or the tables, but to work out how to make their fortune faster from their own businesses. Steph Nash joins SuiteWorld as a guest of e-commerce software company NetSuite to talk to some of those planning global domination.
Las Vegas, where bigger is better, where punters put it all on the line. So where better for small business dreamers from around the world to congregate? They're all chasing the same dream: global success.
There's over 6,000 attendees here at Caesars Forum, all here to learn and to share their highs and lows as they chase success.
The host of this gathering of entrepreneurs, SuiteWorld, is NetSuite. It's a cloud-based platform that gives global customers the tools they need to grow their businesses. It's the first SuiteWorld conference since 2019, when the COVID-19 pandemic smashed the NetSuite customer base. Many of these business owners are still recovering from the disruption. But like all entrepreneurs, there's a sense of optimism here. They almost seem to be rejoicing about the return to more normal times. But there's also a sense of caution. The economic outlook is far from desirable. It's something that NetSuite Australia chief, Jason Toshak, knows is on his customers' minds.
It made customers realise that they needed to be adaptable, flexible and be able to make decisions really, really quickly. So I think at the moment, we've had a lot of, especially in Australia, we've had a number of interest rate rises. We've seen the Australian dollar fall. So I think it's just put a lot of cautiousness into the businesses that we deal with. In addition to that, I think a lot of customers and businesses that have really looked to grow and expand, etc., are now moving that effort to really be more, I suppose, process-driven, efficient, making sure the processes are streamlined, etc. So I think it's all about profit is the new growth now.
Bruce Fitzgerald is the CEO of Xtel, an Australian manufacturer that specialises in the development of highly complex electronic devices. Xtel works with a range of customers, including in the medical, aerospace, defence and telco industries. A worldwide shortage of microchips made it difficult to do business. Xtel products are also manufactured in Melbourne, so add to that shipping delays and rising costs for containers.
Computer chips, etc., have gone from an average lead time of anywhere from 12 to 16 weeks out to 50 to 70 weeks, which has created a lot of issues, not just for us, but obviously for our clients. So what it has meant is that we've had to really change our communication style with our clients, really engaging with them and sharing with them a lot more information in and around what each of the manufacturers of chips are doing all around the world. And what it's also meant is our clients are needing to place orders 18 months to 2 years out.
As Xtel expands globally, its supply chain logistics network becomes more complex. For Bruce, productivity is vital so that he can keep reinvesting in his business.
And really importantly for us is systemisation and making things repeatable. So again, that then comes back to, I suppose, our IT systems, our technology that we use to manufacture our product is absolutely vital. So having something like NetSuite, Oracle NetSuite, as the key IT platform for what we do is absolutely critical part of our success moving forward.
Retail businesses, like wedding dress designer Grace Loves Lace, face a different challenge. Sarah Reiner, the label's global systems manager, navigates the same ongoing supply disruptions, labour shortages and rising costs, but also has to manage it carefully to preserve the brand's reputation.
But particularly our brides, and we call them our brides, not our customers, because it's an emotional journey for them.
And now that the business is getting bigger, with 12 showrooms opened around the world in the last 18 months, the stakes are rising for Sarah.
Transferring 3.5 years ago from multiple software into NetSuite, primarily for the financials, inventory and manufacturing to start with, we could have that seamless omnichannel and real-time reporting.
Branding and reputation is also crucial for US-based interior design business Studio McGee. With the eyes of the world on the studio thanks to Netflix, the margin for error is small. Patrick Ord is the president of Studio McGee.
As president, it's my job and the other people's job in the company to be able to have operations that are equal to the brand that she's created. And that's quite a challenge because it's a remarkable brand.
The construction sector globally is battling such severe conditions that many operators are either not turning a profit or going broke. The massive success for Dream Home Makeover has allowed Patrick to completely change the company's business model.
We don't want to continue to grow a professional services business. It's hard to scale, so we've limited that, and we keep that at a scale to where we can be able to stay sharp in interior design, where we can take on compelling projects that allow us to stretch ourselves and in projects that photograph really well and video really well, so that we can continue to provide really compelling content to our social platforms and to the Netflix type things. And 85% of our revenue is McGee & Co., which is our furniture and kind of housewares brand. We put a lot of effort into that.
The business saw extremely rapid growth through COVID due to both the success of the series and a sudden consumer obsession with homewares and renovations.
Now this year, demand has slowed a little bit as we actually have seen some contraction in the industry. We've moved from a 45,000 square foot warehouse to 325,000 square foot warehouse. We have robots that are assisting with picking and packing. And so we're doing a lot of this capital expenditures, and now we're in a position where a lot of those are at a point where we can start leveraging those investments for operational efficiencies.
For some of the many attendees here at SuiteWorld, global expansion is still either in its early stages or it's just a pipe dream. But that's why they're here, to learn from some of the many amazing global success stories.
For inspiration, small businesses in Australia can look to the Poolworks franchise, which was founded by John O'Brien 30 years ago. His son Shannon, the company's global innovation officer, is responsible for taking the Poolworks business to new markets. Poolworks is the family's 5th global success story, with over 160 stores and 634 service vehicles operating across 3 countries. Shannon has learnt a lot from the company's expansion in the US.
One of the things there, which we were actually hit with over the last couple of years, was a freeze in Dallas. So Texas is one of our big hubs, but there was a really abnormal freeze that occurred that actually froze all of the pools and froze the equipment. That put challenges that we hadn't actually faced too much in the past before, because compare that to Australia, we're not getting freezes. So when you get a freeze, that means all of the piping can freeze, can burst, equipment can get damaged, and that caused a lot of backlog for us.
The development of innovative technology has been critical to the Poolworks expansion process.
We shifted from some more legacy systems that we had, which were a bit disparate, disconnected. We didn't have a central hub of data to be able to make business decisions off. So back then, we actually introduced NetSuite, a cloud-based ERP system that allowed us to bring together our data into one central source from all of our franchise partners. So our franchise partners not only had data about their business, but also from a corporate level, we were able to make strategic business decisions, not only about the different markets, but also strategic-based business decisions from a global perspective.
Someone else who has seen it all is Evan Goldberg, founder of NetSuite and known in the industry as the inventor of the cloud. In 2016, he sold the NetSuite business to tech behemoth Oracle for $9.6 billion. I sat down with him to get his perspective on the way that we do business in 2022.
Evan, it must be really good to be back at SuiteWorld in 2022. A lot has changed since the last SuiteWorld conference. So what are your small business customers telling you right now about economic conditions?
Yeah, well, our customers are seeing very much what you're reading in the papers and seeing on TV, that the economy is going through a lot of gyrations, and interest rates and inflation, all these, and I think making things difficult, in addition to all the other headwinds that they have, for example, the supply chain kinks that seem to have become a lot longer than one would have hoped.
You've experienced a lot as an entrepreneur. You've been through, the tech wreck, the GFC, COVID-19. How do you feel personally about the economy at the moment?
Yeah, well, the one thing I could say about businesses, and all the great businesses that we get to encounter, and we feel this way about ourselves, is we're used to being thrown around in choppy seas. Our boats are a little smaller than the big boats, and so we really, constantly are seeing things that other businesses might not notice. So we're, ready to deal with all kinds of craziness out there, and it continues.
Do you have a view on the economic outlook? I think Jerome Powell, chairman of the US Federal Reserve, only last week mentioned the R word, recession. Are conditions about to get much worse for your customers?
Well, we're still seeing a lot of companies seeing great success and great ideas. People are still really interested in investing in them and pursuing them. They're getting, customers, and again, businesses, especially fast-growing businesses, have always had to be nimble, and so we see still a great environment for customers to grow.
Do you think these challenging conditions kind of impact people's willingness to want to start a business, or for small business customers, crimp their appetite to want to grow their business?
Yeah, well, we've seen it work sort of both ways, and certainly during actual recessions is when we see some of the, kind of 1,000 flowers bloom as people decide or are forced to make new decisions about what they want to do with their careers. So I think we're going to see, continued businesses bringing amazing new ideas to market.
Do you think we're about to see the benefits of scale? Are bigger businesses going to be more resilient?
Well, there's definitely a benefit to scale, and just being able to sort of diversify who you're selling to geographically is obviously very important, because different parts of the world see things happen at sort of different time frames. So I think that our businesses are always looking to scale, and I think that's one of the payoffs that they're going to get.
How much has COVID-19 changed the game now? What practices are really sticking around to change the way that we do business?
Well, obviously we're seeing the working environment change massively, and every company is trying to navigate that and figure out how their employees want to work, how they can be more productive. That presents challenges, but also some great opportunities to reach employees and people that can be incredible contributors that you might not have otherwise been able to reach.
We're hearing a lot anecdotally about this idea of reshoring, about companies bringing their manufacturing back on shore due to, technological advancements and innovation. Is that something that you're seeing within your customer base?
Well, certainly, especially during the depths of COVID, we saw companies really recalibrate their supply chains and where they were going to both get their supplies and where they were going to build their products. And so I think that we're still in a time where, with all the problems there have been in the supply chain, people are still trying to figure it out. But I do think that there is going to be more variety in how people build their products.
Something that is so obvious when listening to NetSuite customers is about how efficiency is everything when it comes to scaling up. How important is productivity going to be in this economy, do you think?
Yes, well, certainly in a situation where times are a little tighter, you obviously have to look under sort of every rock and figure out what are the things that you didn't really worry about before when the business was just coming in, that you can maybe examine now and improve for the long term. So I think companies are making some great changes that are going to last.
Evan, how do you view the expectations and behaviours of consumers now post-COVID? Is it radically different?
Well, I like to think that, the companies that we work with have always been hyper-focused on customer satisfaction, and so that's sort of, the more that changes, the more things change, the more that stays the same. But I think expectations because of things like delivery and sort of instant gratification have probably changed, especially for companies that provide products.
Do you think consumers have a low threshold now for disruption? Is it harder than ever to maintain customer loyalty?
I think that, again, I think that the businesses that we work with have always known that that's their lifeblood. It's so much easier to build your business when customers stay and buy more than to find new customers. But yes, I think that it provides really a bulwark against these changes when you have that kind of customer loyalty.
What about ESG and sustainability? How are these ideals changing the way that your customers do business?
Yes, well, we've been lucky enough to have some amazing companies that have built social impact into their mission, and they get great customer loyalty because I think that, sort of the next generation of consumers want to see that. They want to see that a business is doing more than just making money. So, I see that as a trend that's going to continue forever.
You've been in the tech space now for quite some time. What do you make of the current environment for tech companies? We've seen these wild swings in valuations, and for listed companies, just a lot of volatility.
Right. Well, companies that have great ideas and are willing to dig in and really build something that lasts are going to be fine. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for companies that are sort of trying to look for that quick win.
And just finally, Evan, you've announced some changes this week for your product offering, particularly around banking and account management. How are these changes going to help your customers?
Well, what we hear again and again from our customers is they just want things to be more automated and easier so they can spend less time on the drudgery and more time really building their business and adding value into their business. And so really it comes down to what our customers have been asking for in making it easier to use NetSuite every day.
Evan Goldberg, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for today's program. Up next is all the latest news right here on Sky News. Business Weekend returns next Sunday. But don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest business news with our daily program, Business Now, at 4:30 and 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and via our website, skynews.com.au, where you'll find replays of the program. Thanks for your company today. I'm Ross Greenwood. We'll see you next week.